Okay, let's go ahead and move on to China. This is obviously, again, a very important, geopolitical relationship, and how exactly everything is shaking out, nobody knows. Let's go put this first thing up there on the screen, which is that the U.S. has apparently told its allies that China has signaled an openness to providing Russia with military support from the Financial Times. Now, Moscow requested equipment, including surface-to-air missiles. Keep in mind, the Chinese deny this, the Russians deny it, and the Americans are leaking it from a State Department cable, and it's probably an authorized leak. So as to the actual efficacy and all of that of this, or the amount of truth involved in this is up for debate.
Yes.
That being said, what they continue to say from the U.S. side is that the Chinese have signaled a willingness to provide military assistance. If we were to read the tea leaves in relative to current U.S. policy, the U.S. and the Biden administration has seen it that before the Russian invasion, they declassified as much as possible in order to, basically remove the act of surprise from the Russians, and also to use it as diplomatic leverage against them.
And to undermine their propaganda domestically as well, yeah.
It's very likely that they're doing the exact same thing here, if the intel is true. So just because it was true once does not mean it's necessarily true. Again, always keep that in mind. The 5 different types of equipment that they're asking for: surface-to-air missiles, drones, intelligence and related equipment, ISR, armored vehicles, and vehicles used for logistics and support. Now, as we said yesterday, the Russians don't technically need any of this stuff. They're asking for it, very likely, in order to bolster the diplomatic ties between the two countries. The Chinese military views very fondly any military that it's fought side by side in. This is part of the reason that they call them blood brothers with the North Korean army, because they look very fondly back at the Korean War, whenever they fought against the Americans, and there's a ties forged in blood, which is very important to them. The Russians obviously know this too, and they're probably trying to get at least some sort of similar type relationship from the Chinese, but China obviously has to walk a tightrope. And let's put this next one up there on the screen, because it just shows you how confusing the situation is. China, however, through its state media propaganda outlets, has signaled a disinterest in providing weapons to Russia for a brutal Ukrainian campaign. The reason that this matters is that all eyes were on Global Times, and specifically Hu Xixin, who is, an editor over at Global Times. I read Global Times all the time, and this is part of our reason we've been talking about state media, because I know that they specifically talk in English in order to try to signal us both their most diplomatic talks, but also kind of their most hawkish elements. And that's what Global Times is. It's like the attack dog of the Chinese Communist Party. So to see the attack dog himself say in this opinion piece that the Biden administration's move was arrogant, but that as a major military power, Russia does not need to ask China to provide substantial military assistance, he says this, quote, "Moreover, China is not obligated to promise nor to export arms to Russia," he said in a video. Now, this matters because if he's going to say that they are under no obligation to do so, and that they have no promise to do so, and that's the most hawkish element of Chinese state media, that in and of itself is a data point that we could point to and say, well, the official arm of the Chinese regime is saying, or at least pushing the public towards thinking that they don't need to do this.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that secret shipments may not happen.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they may not have been like, yeah, maybe, but what are you going to do for us? So it's a complicated situation, but it would change the situation on the ground.
Yes. Well, let's parse the language here a little bit too. Another piece of what they say is, as a major military industrial power, Russia does not need to ask China to provide substantial military assistance for the limited scale war in Ukraine. Now, what we do know is the Chinese have previously provided Russia not with arms, but with supplies like tents, winter coats for some of their conflicts along their border. So, if you look at the U.S.'s wording, they talk about general military assistance. They don't specifically say arms. So you could read this as basically, in a certain sense, going together, as they may provide that sort of military assistance, things like supplies, tents, coats, those types of items, but not actually provide arms, which would be kind of consistent with how China has behaved thus far with trying to kind of straddle the fence.
Right.
Because the minute you provide actual offensive weapons, that's a very different thing than providing winter coats. So as I read this, that seemed like one potential possibility, But basically, we're just trying to present both sides of what's being said here. The Chinese are saying basically, no, the Kremlin, of course, is denying that they even asked, because it's very embarrassing for them that they would have to go to anyone at this point and ask for anything. This should have been, they thought this was going to be over in just a matter of days, and they still aren't making significant progress towards Kyiv. But, the White House saying that the Chinese did signal their willingness to provide military assistance. That's kind of very careful language, not saying when, not saying what, not saying how.
Right, and the U.S. National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, met yesterday with the Chinese foreign minister for 7 hours. We didn't get all that much of a readout necessarily. Let's put this up there on the screen. Yeah, like a tiny little paragraph in terms of what they're willing to tell us from a 7-hour meeting. Jake Sullivan met today with Chinese Communist Party Politburo member. Okay, I'm going to skip his title. In Rome, Italy. Their meeting, his title is half of the paragraph. Their meeting followed up on the November 15, 2022 virtual meeting. Mr. Sullivan raised a range of issues in U.S.-China relations with substantial discussion of Russia's war against Ukraine. They also underscored the importance of maintaining open lines of communication between the U.S. and China. So a whole lot of nothing that came out of that meeting, and a whole lot of nothing in terms of what they're willing to tell us about that meeting. I would love to have been a fly on the room.
Oh, yeah.
The main thing that we also need to emphasize is that China is in a very precarious situation economically. They cannot risk even 1/10 of the sanctions that we've levied upon Russia. I'm going to be doing a lot more on this in my monologue as to what that means for us. But in terms of what it means for them, let's put this up there on the screen. It is total carnage out there on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. They are having some of their worst days since 2008. They're having massive panic selling. Their stock equities here in the United States are down by like 70-something%. They have a major real estate bubble, all kinds of crazy financialization and short selling bets on the nickel markets. It's been kind of fun to watch. But yeah, just look at that graph for those of you who are watching. But they're falling off a cliff over there. They got themselves a big old problem in terms of speculation and financial markets. The CCP is trying to run in and backstop as much of the market as possible. But whenever we cover that Evergrande crisis, this is just a very similar kind of slow roll cascade to something that could be really, really bad. So just consider that they're in a precarious economic situation where if they were levied with some sort of sanctions or if their trade took a hit, boom, they're done, especially given the COVID situation with them right now. It would put them in a very, very, very tough situation. So it's an interesting development. China has to choose between being a Russian-aligned power explicitly against the West, even though they are, and we all know it. They haven't explicitly declared it so, and they still have reaped arguably more than anybody else the benefits of the Western international-led order.
Oh, no doubt about it.
On the other side, they could choose to keep with that because it's been so economically lucrative, kind of leave the Russians out in the cold and play some sort of diplomatic game. But whatever course they decide, if they do choose to broker a peace, that's a realignment of the global order. If they do choose to side with the Russians, well, everybody gear up because that's not going to be a fun 100 years for us to live in. And if they choose to side with us, then the Russians are definitely toast in the long run. So it's all three. They have become a great power, obviously, in their own right. And whatever course they choose will definitely determine the course of history.
Yeah, I mean, that's what was so significant about the essay that we brought you yesterday.
Oh, right.
From a state-aligned thinker that was basically making the case, look, we're trying to be neutral, and there is no neutrality.
Yeah, there's no neutrality.
That's just not a place where you can possibly stand. All of our actions, abstaining and the Security Council votes and those sorts of things are being interpreted as siding with Russia. So do we really want to be in this place of being part of the sort of pariah bloc of the world with, Europeans and the US sort of more aligned, more united than they've been in a long time? Do we really want to be explicitly on the other side of that ledger? And I think that's what they're contemplating right now. And the reason we keep trying to read these tea leaves and trying to figure out as best we can and predict as best we can what they might do is because if anyone could end this conflict, it would be them. I mean, if they really put pressure on Moscow and pulled their support and we're not going to back them in this outrageous war, that would force Moscow's hand and force them to make some concessions at the table and hopefully be able to come to some sort of negotiated settlement. So they really are the key player in all of this for the immediate future, but also in terms of that longer term, geopolitical alignment and understanding what the world is going to look like a year, 2 years, a decade from now, this is the moment.
Absolutely.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.